50 years I built my empire and raised my son. I gave him everything, but he, blinded by greed, betrayed me. My daughter-in-law pushed me off a yacht, certain I would disappear forever. This was a normal day on a yacht that changed everything. It all started with a simple, breathtakingly stupid act of kindness. A few weeks ago, Evelyn Reed, had decided to sell my beloved antique art collection to fund a new wing for the local children's hospital. For 62 years, these pieces had been my pride and joy, but what good is art if it doesn't serve a purpose beyond collecting dust and admiration? My late husband, a man who believed in the tangible good of every dollar, would have been proud. I was feeling the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you're doing the right thing, a quiet contentment that had been missing since James passed. I was humming a little tune as I signed the final papers with the foundation's representative, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over me. The deal was done. The money, a tidy sum of nearly $3 billion, was set to be transferred to the hospital's account within the week. I had decided to celebrate this momentous occasion with a little family getaway, a cruise on my new yacht, the Serenity, a symbolic name, really. My son, Mark, a man who inherited his father's good looks but none of his quiet wisdom, was there with his wife, Jessica. Jessica, a woman who looked like a magazine cover and had the soul of a hungry barracuda. It was supposed to be a small, intimate celebration, just the three of us, soaking in the sun and the salt air, a last hurrah before I started my new life of quiet philanthropy and knitting. The moment I stepped onto the deck, a gust of wind caught my hair. "Ah, there you are, my lovely lady," Mark called out, his smile too wide to be genuine. He'd inherited his father's charm but twisted it into a tool of manipulation. I was too old and too wise to fall for it, but I let him play his little game. Jessica just gave a tight, thin-lipped smile. She was wearing a blindingly white sundress that seemed to mock the deep blue of the ocean. Her eyes, always calculating, darted from my face to the yacht's polished mahogany rails. I should have seen it then. The red flags were there waving like mad, but I was blinded by the simple desire for a pleasant family outing. As the yacht left the harbor, I couldn't help but notice the way Mark and Jessica whispered to each other, their heads close together. They were a beautiful couple, I'll give them that. On the surface, a perfect pair, but underneath, a tangled mess of greed and entitlement. I, in my naive matriarchal bliss, saw their quiet consultations as a sign of intimacy. How wrong I was. The day was perfect, almost too perfect. The sun was warm, the sky was a cloudless expanse of azure, and the sea was a gentle swell of deep turquoise. We ate a light lunch on deck, and I regaled them with stories of my early days with James, how we built our empire from a small, insignificant garage startup. Mark nodded along, but his eyes were vacant. Jessica kept checking her phone, a little frown on her perfect face. It wasn't a family outing. It was a business meeting, and I was the subject of their quiet negotiations. It struck me then how little they truly cared for me beyond my financial standing. It was a sobering realization, but I brushed it off. I was a Reed. We didn't dwell on negativity. We faced it head on. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, I walked to the stern, leaning on the railing and admiring the view. I was thinking about James, how he would have loved this view, how he would have insisted on staying out here until the last drop of sunlight was gone. I felt a gentle hand on my back. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Evelyn?" Jessica said, her voice a little too sweet. She was standing behind me, a strange, unreadable expression on her face. Her hand was no longer gentle. It was a firm, solid push. I stumbled forward, my feet slipping on the slick deck. The railing came up fast, a cold, hard line against my stomach. My heart, the one that had just been so full of peace and love, leaped into my throat. And then there was a sharp, final shove. I went over the side, the world tilting in a sickening rush of wind and salt spray. The last thing I saw was Jessica's face, a mask of cold, triumphant indifference. The splash was loud, a brutal punctuation mark on a perfect day. The water was shockingly cold, a numbing shock to my system. I bobbed to the surface, gasping for air, the salt stinging my eyes. I looked back at the yacht and saw Mark standing next to Jessica, a look of horrified realization on his face. He made a move to come to the railing, but Jessica held him back, her hand on his arm. He shook her off, but it was too late. The yacht was already turning, leaving me behind in its wake. The churning white foam of the propeller became a cruel, foamy symbol of their betrayal. I couldn't believe it. I, Evelyn Reed, a woman who had spent her life building, caring, and giving, had been pushed into the cold, indifferent ocean by the two people I had trusted the most. And for what? The money? The $3 billion that was going to a children's hospital? It was beyond comprehension. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, more painful than the icy water. I tread water, watching the yacht grow smaller, a white speck against the setting sun. I was a survivor, a fighter. I was the woman who had built an empire from nothing. I wasn't going to let them win. I knew I had to stay alive. I was going to make it back to shore. And when I did, I was going to make them regret the day they decided to cross me. For all of you watching, if you find yourself in a similar spot, facing a storm you never saw coming, please remember that the only way through is to find your strength. If you find my story compelling, consider subscribing to our channel for more tales of resilience and unexpected twists. My mind, a whirlwind of disbelief and fury, began to calm as my survival instincts kicked in. I, Evelyn Reed, was not going to be a footnote in a tragic maritime accident. I was a woman who had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals and built a business from the ground up, not some helpless damsel in distress. The ocean, which a moment ago had felt like a tomb, now seemed like an accomplice to my defiance. It was as if its vastness challenged me to prove my worth, and I was more than ready to accept the challenge. The cold was a sharp, biting reminder of my situation, but it also served as a focusing agent. My years of regular swimming for exercise came to my rescue. I began to swim, not aimlessly, but with a purpose. I scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of land. The sun had almost fully set, and the sky was a canvas of deep violet and indigo, with a smattering of stars beginning to emerge. I was an experienced swimmer, a relic from my days competing in local swim meets in my youth. The motions were ingrained in my muscle memory, a steady, rhythmic stroke that propelled me forward. I had to focus on the immediate, on the here and now. The anger and betrayal would be there later. Right now, I needed to survive. My thoughts, however, were not so easily subdued. The image of Jessica's face, cold and triumphant, flashed in my mind. The way she had looked at Mark, a silent command in her eyes, and the way he had hesitated, a flicker of indecision that spoke volumes. He was a spineless man, a man who would rather appease his wife than stand up for his own mother. It was a painful truth, a truth as sharp as the barnacles on a buoy. I had given that boy everything. I had nurtured him, supported him, and loved him unconditionally. And he had, in the end, chosen a woman who was a walking, talking embodiment of greed. The thought was so bitter, it almost made me choke on a mouthful of salt water. But then a new thought, cold and captivating, began to form. They thought I was gone. They thought they had won. They were celebrating their victory, already dividing my fortune in their minds, not knowing that the $3 billion was already gone. It was in the hospital's account, a done deal, an unchangeable fact. They had pushed me into the ocean for nothing. The irony was so rich and delicious that a bitter laugh escaped my lips. I couldn't help it. They were so busy being villains, they had overlooked a basic fact. I wasn't a naive old lady. I was a shrewd businesswoman.
I had a contingency plan for everything, even for my own death. And my final act was going to be a masterpiece of passive aggressive revenge. The thought energized me. The cold no longer seemed so intense. My strokes became more powerful, fueled by a mixture of outrage and a newfound sense of purpose. I was no longer just fighting to survive. I was fighting to win. I was fighting to make them pay. The darkness was complete now, but the stars were a brilliant canopy above me. I looked at them, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace. I was a tiny speck in a vast, indifferent universe, but I was a speck with a purpose. I was Evelyn Reed, and I was going to survive. I swam for what felt like an eternity, my muscles aching, my lungs burning. The rhythmic sound of the waves and the stars above were my only companions. My focus narrowed to the simple act of breathing and stroking, one breath, one stroke, 1 second at a time. I was in a state of flow where past and future ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the present moment. I was a machine, a human engine, fueled by the sheer force of my will. The moon rose, a pale sliver of silver light, and illuminated my path. I saw it then, a faint blinking light on the horizon. It was a distant lighthouse, a beacon of hope in the middle of a vast, empty expanse. A new wave of energy surged through me. I was not alone. I was not lost. I was going to make it. I continued my rhythmic strokes, the light on the horizon a constant, unwavering guide. It seemed to be getting closer, but it was hard to tell in the dark. My mind, now freed from the immediate threat of death, began to form a plan. I wasn't just going to return, I was going to return in a way that would make them truly appreciate what they had done. I wasn't going to show up at their door, dripping wet and angry. I was going to orchestrate my return, my triumph, in a way that would leave them stunned. They had tried to make me disappear. I was going to make them wish they never met me. The thought was so sweet, bitter comfort in the cold, dark ocean. I was coming. They just didn't know it yet. I know what you're thinking. How could they be so brazen? The truth is, my family's betrayal runs deeper than you can imagine. What I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about loyalty and greed. You don't want to miss what comes next.
The morning sun, a brilliant golden orb, found me a few yards from the shoreline, a small, desolate strip of beach that seemed to exist outside the bounds of the modern world. I dragged myself onto the sand, my body heavy with exhaustion and salt, my muscles screaming in protest. I lay there for a long moment, my face pressed into the cool, damp sand, just breathing. The sun was warm and comforting on my face, a stark contrast to the unforgiving cold of the ocean. My clothes were heavy, clinging to my skin, and my hair was a tangled mess of salt and knots. I must have looked like a wild woman, a castaway from a forgotten ship, and in a way I was. I slowly sat up, my bones creaking, and looked around. The beach was deserted, not a soul in sight, just sand, sea, and the occasional gull crying overhead. I was in the middle of nowhere. I had no phone, no money, and no idea where I was. I was a woman who had everything, and now I had nothing. It was a bizarre, surreal experience, like a scene from a low-budget movie. I couldn't help but chuckle. I, Evelyn Reed, the woman who had once owned a private jet, was now on a deserted beach with nothing but the clothes on my back. My predicament was so absurd that it was almost funny. But then my mind turned to Mark and Jessica. They were probably back in my pig house, toasting their victory with expensive champagne, their cruel hearts filled with triumph.
The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins, and the humor of my situation evaporated instantly. I was alive, and they had no idea. It was a powerful, intoxicating thought. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and began to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I followed the shoreline, my bare feet sinking into the soft sand with every step. I was on a mission of revenge, of justice. I was a ghost, a revenant, come back from the dead to haunt the living, and my targets were my own son and his wife. The sun began to climb higher, and the heat became more intense. My stomach, which had been in a state of shock, began to rumble with protest. I was famished. I hadn't eaten since lunch on the yacht, which felt like a lifetime ago. I scanned the beach, looking for any sign of life, a road, a house, anything. My mind was a steel trap, running through every scenario, every possible outcome. I was a CEO, a master of strategy. This was just a new, more difficult game, and I was going to win. I walked for what felt like hours, the sun beating down on my head. My legs were a leaden weight, and my throat was parched. I was on the verge of giving up, of just collapsing on the sand and letting the sun take me, when I saw it. A small, weathered shack nestled among a cluster of palm trees. It looked old and abandoned, a ghost from a past era, but it was something of human life. A spark of hope ignited within me. I stumbled towards it, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. The shack was little more than a pile of weathered wood and rusting tin. It was clearly not inhabited, but it was something. As I got closer, I noticed a small, hand-painted sign hanging over the door. Old Man Jim's, it read, in faded, chipped letters. I pushed the rickety door open, and the smell of salt water and old wood filled my nostrils. Inside, the shack was filled with an assortment of junk: old fishing nets, rusted buoys, and broken pieces of driftwood. It was a fisherman's hideout, a place to store his gear and escape the sun. And in the corner, a small, tarnished silver flask. I rushed to it, my hands trembling with anticipation. I uncapped it, and a strong, unpleasant smell filled the air. It was whiskey. I had never been a whiskey drinker, but at that moment, it seemed like the most delicious drink in the world. I took a small sip, and the liquid burned its way down my throat, a warm, fiery sensation that woke up my senses. I didn't drink the whole thing. I was a pragmatist. I didn't know when I would find water again. I took another small sip and then capped the flask and put it in my pocket. I looked around the shack, searching for anything useful. I found a tattered old map, a little compass, and a small, rusted knife. The map was of the local coast, and to my immense relief, I was able to pinpoint my location. I was on a remote stretch of the Florida Keys, a place where civilization was a distant memory. I was a long way from home. The realization was sobering, but not disheartening. I had a path. I had a destination. I had a plan. My next step was to find a road, a way to get back to the world. I looked at the map, and a long, winding road was indicated a few miles inland. It would be a long, difficult walk, but I was determined. I was Evelyn Reed, and I was going to win this game. The thought of their shock and disbelief when they saw me was a powerful motivator. They thought I was gone. They were wrong. Very, very wrong.
The inland trek was far more brutal than the shoreline walk. The air, devoid of the sea breeze, was thick and humid, a stifling blanket of heat that clung to my skin. The vegetation was dense, a thick tangle of palmettos and mangroves that snagged at my clothes and scratched my skin. My little map, a crinkled, salt-stained relic, was my only guide, and I held it with the reverence of a religious text. The sun was a relentless tyrant, and my small sip of whiskey was a distant memory.
The thirst was an all-consuming fire in my throat, a constant, nagging reminder of my vulnerability. I, a woman who had never wanted for a single thing in her life, was now at the mercy of the elements. It was a humbling, terrifying experience. But as always, my thoughts turned to Mark and Jessica. The thought of their betrayal was a bitter wellspring of fury that kept me moving. They had planned this. I was sure of it now. Jessica's calculating glance, Mark's spineless hesitation, it was all a carefully choreographed dance of greed. The thought gave me strength, a kind of dark energy that fueled my tired body. I wasn't just walking to survive, I was walking for revenge. I was a specter, a ghost, an angry shade that would not rest until justice was served. They thought I was gone, a memory to be buried with a lavish funeral and a few crocodile tears. They were so wrong. The terrain was unforgiving. I tripped over a gnarled root and fell hard, scraping my knee on a sharp rock. The pain was a hot, searing flame, but I barely registered it. I pushed myself up, my hands caked with dirt, and continued my march. I was no longer a refined, elegant society matron. I was a survivor, a beast of the wild fighting for my life. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. My entire life had been a meticulously curated performance of grace and poise. Now I was a dirty, disheveled woman, a broken mess of contradictions. And yet I had never felt more alive. The raw, primal need to survive had stripped away all the pretense, all the social niceties, and left me with the core of who I was. I was a fighter. I was resilient. I was Evelyn Reed. As the sun began to dip, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, I saw it. A small dirt road. It was little more than a pair of muddy ruts in the ground, but to me, it was a highway. I felt a surge of triumph, a powerful, exhilarating feeling that made me want to shout. I had made it. I had survived. I had a path back to the world, a way to begin my final act of revenge. I walked along the road, my pace quickening with every step. The road was lined with scrubby bushes and tall, spiky grasses. The air was filled with the buzzing of insects and the chirping of unseen creatures. It was a desolate place, but it was a place with a purpose. After a long, arduous walk, I saw it. A small, weathered gas station, its neon sign a beacon in the twilight. It was a dingy, dilapidated place, but to me, it was a palace. A single, battered pickup truck was parked in front, and a lone figure sat on a rocking chair on the porch, with a shotgun resting on his lap. I felt a pang of fear, but I pushed it down. I was a Reed. We didn't show fear. We faced it head on. I walked up to the porch, my shoulders back, my head held high, and the old man with the shotgun looked up. His eyes, as shrewd and suspicious as a fox's, narrowed as he took me in. "Mighty far from home, ain't you, ma'am?" he said, his voice a low rumble. I couldn't help but smile. He saw right through my disheveled appearance to the person underneath. "You have no idea," I said, my voice hoarse from thirst. "I need a ride to the nearest town. I can pay you handsomely." The old man raised a skeptical eyebrow. "With what, ma'am? Looks like the only thing you got on you is a whole lot of salt water." I took a deep breath. "My name is Evelyn Reed. My son and daughter-in-law tried to kill me, and I need to get back to the world to make them pay." The old man just looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. He had heard every crazy story in the world, and mine was probably just another one. But something in my eyes, a fire that had been lit by betrayal and a thirst for justice, must have convinced him. He put the shotgun down and gestured to the truck. "Get in, ma'am. I'll take you to the police station. Maybe they can help you." I nodded, my heart full of a mixture of gratitude and triumph. I was back. I was in the game, and I was going to win. Mark and Jessica had no idea what was coming. They thought I had pushed me off a yacht. They were wrong. They had pushed me into a new life, a life where I was no longer a passive bystander, but an active, vengeful participant. I was coming for them, and I was going to make them regret the day they tried to bury me. I was Evelyn Reed, and I was back. I can't believe how quickly everything unraveled. It's hard to wrap my mind around the fact that the people I loved most in this world wanted me dead. But I'm not just going to roll over and play dead. I have a plan, and you won't want to miss how this revenge unfolds. Stay with me because the next part is what you've been waiting for.
The old man, whose name I learned was Hank, drove with a slow, deliberate caution that both soothed and frustrated me. The truck, a rust bucket with more miles than an astronaut, groaned and rattled with every bump in the road. As we drove, I recounted my story, a tale that sounded more and more insane with every word I spoke. My own flesh and blood, I said, my voice thick with a bitterness I hadn't known I possessed. They thought they were so clever. Hank just nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. He didn't offer platitudes or sympathy, for which I was grateful. He simply listened, a quiet, weathered presence that was more comforting than 1,000 empty words. He was a man who had seen things, and he recognized a raw, unvarnished truth when he heard one. He took me to the nearest town, a sleepy little place called Osprey Cove, a town so small that the gas station was also the general store, the post office, and the local hangout. I was still dressed in my salt-stained, ripped clothes, and I must have been a sight to behold. A woman who looked like she'd been through a hurricane, a walking testament to betrayal. Hank dropped me off at the police station, a small, unassuming building with a single patrol car parked out front. "They'll take care of you, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. I thanked him, and a fierce sense of gratitude welled up in my chest. He was a stranger, a man who owed me nothing, and yet he had shown me a kindness that my own son couldn't. I was a Reed, and we paid our debts. I would remember him. I walked into the police station and was met with the skeptical, weary gaze of the lone officer on duty, a young man with a tired face and a name tag that read Officer Davis. I told him my story again, my voice gaining strength with every word. The yacht, the $3 billion, the push. Officer Davis listened, his expression a mask of professional politeness, but his eyes were filled with doubt. I was just another crazy woman with a wild story, a tourist who had had a bad acid trip in the Florida Keys. He took a few notes, his pen scratching against the paper, but his heart wasn't in it. I could tell he was just humoring me. He gave me a generic form to fill out and a cup of lukewarm water. It was clear he didn't believe a word I said. "Look," I said, my voice sharp with frustration, "my son is Mark Reed. My late husband was James Reed. Look it up. We're in every financial newspaper you can think of." The mention of the name seemed to pique his interest. He looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. "The Reeds. You're a Reed?" he asked, his voice tinged with a newfound respect. "I am," I said, a sense of vindication in my chest. "And my son and his wife tried to kill me." He left the room for a moment, and I could hear him on the phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur. He came back a few minutes later, his face pale. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice now a lot more deferential, "we just got a call. Your son and daughter-in-law reported you missing." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. They had done it. They had made their move. "They're on their way here now to give a statement," he continued, his eyes wide with a strange mix of horror and pity. A plan began to form in my mind, a brilliant, audacious plan that would make them regret the day they were born. This was my stage. This was my moment. This was my revenge. I was a Reed. I didn't get mad. I got even. They thought I was gone for good. But I'm not just back. I'm a force to be reckoned with, and my children have no idea what's coming for them. The game has just begun, and the next move is mine. I sat on a hard, cold bench in the police station, a strange and unsettling calm settling over me. My son and daughter-in-law were on their way. They were coming here, to this small, dusty police station, to report their mother missing. They would arrive, a picture of false grief, their faces a mask of concern and sorrow, and they would see me, alive. The thought was a powerful, invigorating tonic. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when the tables would turn and the hunters would become the hunted. My plan was simple, a masterpiece of psychological warfare. I wasn't going to shout or scream. I wasn't going to accuse them of attempted murder in front of the weary officer. No, that would only make me look like a hysterical old woman. I was going to be calm. I was going to be poised. I was going to be the victim, and they were going to be the liars. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, picturing the scene in my mind. Mark would be pale, his eyes darting around the room, a deer caught in the sidelights. Jessica, a master of deception, would be more controlled, but even she couldn't hide the shock, the flicker of pure, unadulterated terror in her eyes. I had been planning this moment in my head since I was in the middle of the ocean, a small, insignificant speck in a vast, indifferent universe. My survival wasn't just a matter of luck. It was a matter of will. My will to see them pay. The front door of the police station opened, and I looked up. There they were, Mark and Jessica. They were a picture of elegant, understated grief. Jessica was wearing a simple black dress, her face devoid of makeup, a perfect, tragic figure. Mark was in a dark suit, his face a mask of sorrow. They didn't see me at first. They walked up to Officer Davis, their voices low and urgent. "We're here to report my mother missing," Mark said, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. "She was on a yacht, and she just disappeared." I couldn't help but smile. The audacity of it all, the sheer unadulterated gall. It was a breathtaking performance. I cleared my throat, a small, insignificant sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. Mark and Jessica turned, their heads snapping in my direction. They saw me, and their masks of grief shattered into a million little pieces. The blood drained from Mark's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. His jaw went slack, and his eyes, which had been so full of fake sorrow, were now wide with a horrified, panicked terror. Jessica, for her part, was a masterpiece of control. Her face, which had been so pale, now flushed with a violent red anger. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and a muscle in her jaw twitched. She had a cold, hard rage that was a thing of beauty to behold. It was as if she couldn't believe her own eyes. I was supposed to be dead. I was supposed to be at the bottom of the ocean. But here I was, alive. I stood up, my posture straight and regal, and walked towards them. I was no longer the disheveled castaway. I was Evelyn Reed. "Mark," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a ship's captain in a storm. "Jessica." My voice was a soft, gentle purr, devoid of anger or accusation. It was far more terrifying than a shout. Mark stumbled back, his hands shaking. "Mom," he whispered, his voice a choked, disbelieving sob. How are you here?" I smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Why, Mark, I'm just as surprised to see you as you are to see me." Jessica took a step forward, her hands clenched into tight fists. "What are you doing here, Evelyn?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. You were supposed to be on the yacht." And I was, my voice still as calm as a summer day, "right up until the point where you pushed me off." The words, spoken so calmly, hit them with the force of a physical blow. Mark stumbled again, and Jessica's face contorted with rage. Officer Davis, who had been watching this bizarre scene unfold with a look of utter bewilderment, now stepped forward. "Mrs. Reed, are you saying they pushed you off a yacht?" I turned to him, my face a mask of serene, victimized innocence. "That's exactly what I'm saying, officer." I then turned back to Mark and Jessica, my eyes a pair of ice-cold daggers fixed on theirs. Mark was a mess, a sobbing, shaking wreck of a man. Jessica, on the other hand, had regained her composure. Her face was a perfect cold mask. "Officer," she said, her voice smooth and confident, "my mother has a history of mental instability. She's been in and out of clinics for years." I laughed, a loud, booming laugh that was completely out of place in the silent, tense room.
Oh, please, Jessica, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Mental instability? Is that what you're calling it now? I call it a healthy suspicion of people who try to steal my $3 billion. The mention of the money was a calculated, deliberate move. It was the one thing that could truly rattle them, the one thing that was more important to them than my life. I had them, and they knew it. The $3 billion wasn't just money, it was leverage. My children thought they had pulled off the perfect crime, but they were so wrong. The next part of the story reveals the true nature of my plan, and you'll be stunned by the depths of their betrayal and the length I will go to get my justice.
The next few hours were a whirlwind of questions, accusations, and denials. Officer Davis, his initial skepticism now replaced by a wide-eyed fascination, ushered us into a small, sterile interrogation room. It was a scene straight out of a bad crime drama, and I couldn't help but appreciate the sheer irony of it all. Mark was a quivering mess, unable to form a coherent sentence. He just kept staring at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and disbelief, as if I were a ghost. Jessica, on the other hand, was a master of her craft. She denied everything, her voice a calm, steady stream of lies. "My mother has always been prone to exaggeration," she said, her hands clasped neatly in her lap. "She has a vivid imagination. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding." I just sat there, a serene smile on my face, and let her talk. It was a beautiful, mesmerizing performance, but I had a secret weapon. My final act of revenge wasn't just my survival. It was a carefully orchestrated plan that would leave them with nothing. After a long, frustrating hour, Officer Davis sighed and rubbed his temples. "Look," he said, his voice weary, "I'm going to have to make some calls. The yacht, the $3 billion, this is way out of my jurisdiction." He stood up and left the room, leaving the three of us in a tense, suffocating silence. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes, as sharp and cold as a serpent's, fixed on mine. "You think you've won, Evelyn?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin our lives?" I just smiled. "Oh, my dear Jessica," I said, my voice a soft purr. "I haven't even started yet." The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with unspoken threats and a seething, barely contained rage. I had them exactly where I wanted them. They were so busy trying to discredit me, they had no idea what was coming next. Mark, who had been silent for so long, finally spoke, his voice a choked, pathetic sob. "Mom, why are you doing this?" I looked at him, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions. The pain was a sharp physical ache in my chest. "Why?" I said, my voice filled with a cold, righteous fury. "You tell me, Mark. You're the one who stood by and watched your wife push your own mother off a yacht. For what? From money that was already gone?" The words hit him hard. He flinched, and his face, which had been so pale, now flushed with a violent, angry red. "We didn't know the money was gone." I laughed, a loud, booming laugh that was completely out of place in the silent, tense room. "Oh, Mark, of course you didn't. You were so busy counting the money, you forgot to check if it was even there. How very careless of you." The door opened, and Officer Davis came back in, his face grim. "I've spoken to my superiors," he said, his eyes fixed on Mark and Jessica. "The $3 billion was indeed transferred to the Children's Hospital. But here's the thing, Mrs. Reed. Without any witnesses or evidence, your story is just that, a story." He paused and looked at them. "We don't have enough to hold you." A wave of relief washed over Mark and Jessica's faces. They had won. They were free. But they were so wrong. My revenge wasn't about putting them in jail. It was about something far more valuable. They walked away from the police station thinking they had won. But what they didn't know was that my plan was already in motion. I wasn't interested in justice in a courtroom. I was interested in something far more poetic, far more satisfying. The next part of the story reveals my true final surprise, and you'll be stunned by the depths of their greed. They walked out of the police station with a swagger, their faces a mix of triumph and smug relief. Mark, his shoulders back, his pathetic bravado now fully restored, put an arm around Jessica's waist. She looked at me, a cold, cruel smile on her face. "Looks like your little fairy tale didn't get you very far, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Enjoy your little vacation. We'll be sending flowers to your memorial." I just smiled, a small, secretive smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, I think you'll find my memorial is going to be far more dramatic than you could ever imagine." I watched them walk out, their backs ramrod straight, and I knew in my heart that they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. My victory wasn't going to be a legal one. It was going to be a public, humiliating one. My revenge was going to be a story that would go viral, a cautionary tale that would follow them for the rest of their lives. I walked out of the police station and found Hank, the old man who had given me a ride, leaning against his rusty truck. He looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet, knowing understanding. "They let them go, didn't they?" he said, his voice a low rumble. I nodded. "They did." He just shook his head. "Some people just don't have a soul." I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile this time. "Some people just don't have a conscience, Hank, but they'll get what's coming to them, just not from the police." I had a plan. I wasn't a legal expert, but I was a master of media relations. I had spent my life building a brand, a reputation, and I was going to use every tool in my arsenal to expose them. I had a trusted lawyer, a man who had been with the company since the beginning, a man who would believe me without question. I had a network of friends and acquaintances who would be able to get my story out. And most importantly, I had the truth. A truth that was far more powerful than any lie they could ever concoct. I looked at Hank. "Hank," I said, my voice filled with a powerful, invigorating sense of purpose, "can you take me to the nearest bus station? I have a flight to catch." He looked at me, a look of pure bewilderment on his face. "A flight? But you don't have any money." I smiled. "Oh, Hank," I said, my voice a soft purr. "The $3 billion might be gone, but I'm Evelyn Reed. I have a lot more than money in my arsenal." He drove me to the bus station, a grimy, dilapidated place filled with weary travelers. I used the last of the cash I had in my pocket to buy a bus ticket to the nearest city with a major airport. As I sat on the bus, the world of my past, a world of yachts and limousines and private jets, felt like a distant, faded memory. I was a new woman now, a woman who had nothing, and therefore a woman who had nothing to lose. I was a phoenix, a specter rising from the ashes of my past, and I was going to make them regret the day they tried to bury me. I was coming. They just didn't know it yet. They thought they had won the battle, but they had no idea I was about to win the war. The final chapter will reveal my secret weapon, the one thing they never saw coming. It's a twist that will make your jaw drop, and a testament to the fact that you can never truly bury a woman who refuses to die. I arrived in Atlanta, Georgia, a city that was a world away from the humid, salt-soaked desolation of the Florida Keys. I was still a mess, my clothes wrinkled and stained, my hair a frizzy, tangled bird's nest. But the weary travelers on the bus didn't notice me. I was just another face in the crowd, a testament to the fact that you can't judge a book by its cover. I took a cab to the office of my attorney, a man named Arthur Sterling. He was a man who had known me since I was a young, ambitious woman with a dream and a garage startup. He was a man who had seen my triumphs and my failures, and he had always been in my corner. He was a friend. Arthur was a tall, distinguished-looking man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a kind, intelligent face. He looked at me, a single, solitary tear rolling down his cheek. "Evelyn,"
he said, his voice thick with emotion. I heard the news. I couldn't believe it. I just smiled. Believe it, Arthur, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a ship's captain in a storm. Believe it all. I told him everything, from the art collection to the yacht to the push to my escape. He listened, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. They, they tried to kill you, he whispered, his voice trembling with a righteous fury. I nodded. They did, Arthur, for money that was already gone. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. This is a nightmare, Evelyn. We have no evidence, no witnesses. Their story is that you went missing on the yacht. We have nothing to go on. Oh, we have something, Arthur, I said, my voice a soft purr. We have everything. I looked at him, and for the first time he saw the fire in my eyes, the cold, hard resolve that had been forged in the cold, dark waters of the ocean. We're not going to the police, Arthur. We're going to the court of public opinion. I want you to leak the story. All of it. The yacht, the money, the attempted murder. I want you to tell the world that a multi-billion-dollar heiress was pushed off a yacht by her own son-in-law for money that was already gone. I want you to tell the world that they were so blinded by greed, they didn't even bother to check if the money was still there. I want you to make them a laughingstock. Arthur looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. Evelyn, this is audacious. I smiled. I've always been audacious. It's what built the empire, and it's what's going to bring them down. He stood up, and for the first time I saw a look of pure, unadulterated excitement on his face. He was in his element now, a brilliant legal mind with a purpose. Leave it to me, Evelyn, he said, his voice filled with a powerful, invigorating sense of purpose. They won't know what hit them. I sat there, a woman who had nothing, and smiled. I had a secret weapon, a final surprise that would leave them with nothing but their shame. The game was far from over. It had just begun. The story went viral. It was a digital wildfire, spreading across every news outlet, every social media platform. My name, Evelyn Reed, became a hashtag, a symbol of betrayal and resilience. The world was captivated by the sheer audacity of my story. A wealthy 62-year-old matriarch pushed off a yacht by her own son and daughter-in-law for a fortune that was already gone. They thought I was a victim. They thought I was a madwoman. But in the end, they just thought I was a fool. I watched it all unfold from a small, anonymous apartment in Atlanta, a ghost in my own story. The news channels played my old interviews, my face smiling, talking about my family, my son, my daughter-in-law. The irony was a bitter, delicious pill. I watched as they reported on the police investigation, on Mark and Jessica's frantic denials. They were a pathetic spectacle, a pair of panicked liars trying to put out a fire that they themselves had started. I had always been a master strategist, but this was my masterpiece. I hadn't just survived, I had orchestrated a public takedown that was more devastating than any prison sentence. Their friends, their business associates, the entire world was watching them, a pair of greedy, pathetic villains who had tried to kill a woman for nothing. It was a public humiliation that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Their reputations were in tatters. Their social standing was destroyed. No one wanted to be associated with a couple who had tried to murder their own mother. Their carefully constructed lies, built on a foundation of lies and greed, crumbled to dust. And the best part? The money, the $3 billion they had tried to kill me for, was safe. It was with the Children's Hospital, a monument to their folly, a testament to my ultimate triumph. In the end, I had my revenge. It wasn't about money or power. It was about justice, about truth. I had given them every opportunity to be better, to do the right thing, But they had chosen greed, and in the end, it had consumed them. I had survived, and I had won. But it wasn't a triumphant victory. It was a quiet, solemn one. I had lost my family, the very people I had tried to protect, and in the end, that was the most bitter part of all.